Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Gittin Daf Kafav. This week's learning is sponsored by Judy and Zev Berman in honor of Michelle Greenberg-Coburn on the occasion of her celebration of a significant birthday. We take pride in having given her a shas on the occasion of her birthday over 3 decades ago, and see how far Michelle and her family have taken the learning of Torah Shebal Peh. We should celebrate many more years of learning and avodah to Klal Yisrael ad 120. This week's learning is sponsored by Mark and Sameh Deweese Cooper in loving memory of Mark's father, R.V. Cooper, Aryeh Lev ben Meir Baruch, on his 5th yahrzeit. Today's stop is sponsored by the Hadran women of Long Island in loving memory of Yakira Liba bat Avraham Yosef Yehuda Basara Gita, a beloved granddaughter of our friend Tzipi Wolkenfeld. Our hearts are with you and your family at this difficult time. Tehei Nishmata Tehora Tzura B'tzvor Hakayim. Okay, we're going to get started and finish up our sugya of Breira that we started yesterday. And we ended with this question on Rabbi Shimon. Okay, we tried to distinguish between this issue of tole b'dat atzmo and tole b'dat achirim. So the Gemara had asked, right? Rabbi Sharshia said to Rava, "Ha Rabbi Shimon de tole b'dat atzmo late lebreira, but tole b'dat achirim eat lebreira." Tole b'dat atzmo late, and then we said tole b'dat atzmo, even if he's tole b'dat atzmo late lebreira. 1 second, just got confused for 1 second. Hadamaran tole b'dat achirim eat lebreira. Right. So now, then we're going to say, we tried to make this distinction, and now we're going to bring, just like we saw a contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda, we're now going to see a contradiction between Rabbi Shimon, because it says in a Braita. Okay, so now we're going to say, Tole b'dat achirim eat lebreira. What about the Tanya haremi bo'alech amanat yirtzeh ava? Afa pi shelo ratza av mekudeshet. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda omer mishum Rabbi Shimon ratza av mekudeshet lo ratza av ein mekudeshet. We now see that in a case where Tole b'dat achirim, he actually holds breira, because there was this reason to think to distinguish what they said. And now we're going to see Rabbi Shimon holds. If it's other people, he says there is breira. Okay, meaning if you say you'll be mekudeshet as long as my father wants this, then it'll work. And then we can go back and retroactively say it was effective. And this goes against the case of the wine. So remember, somebody buys wine. Right, there's a debate whether he bought the wine on Erev Shabbat Ben Hashmashot and didn't have enough time to take the Truma to Masrot, or maybe it was just an issue that he didn't have another utensil to put, right, another node, as they call it, is the flask that they had the wine in, to separate the wine. And the person wants to drink the wine. So what Rabbi Shimon or Rabbi Yehuda said, we can't do it. Okay, so now we're going to say, right, so it seems there's this contradiction between the case of the wine, where Rabbi Shimon says it doesn't work, and the case with the Mikudeshet, with the betrothal, where we say retroactive designation does work. So now the answer is going to be Amar le, Bein le Rabbi Yehuda, Bein le Rabbi Shimon. We're now going to say, forget this distinction you made. You said about whether the breira is, whether the decision is based on the person themselves, or the decision is based on other people doing some action, right? In other words, all these cases we start with a person, and then he depends or she depends, whatever's going to be on something that's going to happen later. It doesn't matter whether the something that happens later is something they're going to do, or the something that happens later is something someone else is going to decide about. Either which way, eat lahu breira. They all hold breira. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda were the ones that we brought in the case of the wine. And now what did they say in the case of the wine? It doesn't work. You can't drink the wine. Now, we thought the reason you can't drink the wine is because they don't hold by breira. But these other cases we saw, both Rabbi Yehuda before and Rabbi Shimon now, they seem to hold breira. And it's not this distinction of tole b'dat atzmo, tole b'dat achirim. We don't make that distinction. Really, they hold across the board yesh breira. So now what are we left to figure out? Well, what's the issue with the wine then? Why can't you say the wine that I will eventually, right, that the wine that's going to be left in the bottom is all my truma to masrot, and I can drink wine now. And again, whatever is left in the end will be retroactively count as truma. If they hold breira, it should work. To which they say, now there's a totally different reason there. And not only that, but it says the reason in that source. Hatam kidikatane tama. There, the reason Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, and also Rabbi Yossi, it's just we weren't dealing with Rabbi Yossi, because it was Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon that we brought seemingly contradictory opinions, that they do hold breira, and here they don't. Well, it's because it says there, Amru lo le Rabbi Meir. They had a whole discussion with Rabbi Meir who disagreed with them. And they said to Rabbi Meir, Shema yibaka hanod, What's the problem here? It's not that you can't do this because of loss of brera. You could really retroactively designate this as your truma. And then again, whatever's left at the bottom, we'll say, oh, that must have been what you meant to be truma in the first place. Even though obviously we couldn't decide which wine is going to be left at the bottom from the beginning, because that's not the way wine works, it moves around. But what's the problem? This is what we call the worrier attitude, right? Every time we get to the source, this is what we talk about. Are you worried about what if, right? You have to always think, oh no, something but terrible could happen, right? In this case, what would be the terrible thing that would happen? If your flask breaks, right? Let's say you drink whatever percentage of the wine, right? 80-something% of the wine. You leave over whatever needs to go to your truma masva. And then before you get to give it and really separate it and give it to someone, it breaks. And then you never really separated your truma masva. Like let's say you're in the middle, right? You haven't. So at that point, when you haven't separated it out yet, which you plan to do either after Shabbat or once you get to a place where there's a place to separate it and you put it in a flask. But if you never do that, then it turns out you actually were drinking tevel. So there's some problem that maybe down the road, right? Maybe you won't ever separate the truma masra. And then you'll have no way, right? It'll spill on the ground. You'll have no way to ever do this. So that's why they forbid it in this case. Nothing to do with retroactive designation. Theoretically, retroactive designation should work. But since you may never separate it, you may never get to that point where it's separated, you get into a problem. Amar lahem l'chashiyi baka. And Rabbi Meir's response, he's not worried about this. He says, look, if it breaks, we'll deal with that when it breaks, okay? But don't worry. Maybe this will happen and prevent this person from drinking wine now because maybe we'll never end up being able to separate the truma and masra. So Rabbi Meir says, I'm not worried about that. Small chance that maybe something like that will happen. Okay, and with that, we end our sugya and start with the new Mishnah. Hakotev tofsei Gittin. Okay, we've been talking for a while about this tofes and toref, and we're going to continue along these lines, which is, again, the tofes is the form, which basically means the words that appear in every single get with, right, leaving blank spaces for the name, for the date, things like that. The toref is the filling in of the important parts, okay? And then just to remind you, hopefully you remember this, but just in case, Rabbi Elazar holds edim sirakarti, which means the witnesses that are critical are the ones that witness the giving of the get to the woman, which means that he views when it says in the Torah v'katav, literally as v'katav, and that the ktiva is what's important and has to be done lishma. The writing is significant. Rabbi Meir says no. It's the edim that sign on the get that are critical, that make the get the get. And because of that, he views the Torah, when it says v'katav, as v'chatam. V'katav doesn't really mean he has to write it for her. It means he has to sign it with her in mind. And therefore, they each have a different approach about whether how important the writing of the get is or not. We're going to now read this Mishnah. And like we've done with the previous Mishnahs, we're going to try to figure out, is this according to Rabbi Elazar? Is it according to Rabbi Meir? We're going to have three opinions in the Mishnah. And the one they're going to be concerned about trying to attribute is the one that's unattributed, is the first opinion we call the tanna, an unattributed opinion. And we're going to try to figure out, is it Rabbi Elazar, is it Rabbi Meir? And within this first opinion, we're going to talk about a takana. There was a takana that the rabbis instituted to make things better, right? Where takana usually, or in this case for sure, goes against some halakha. And that's the halakha, basic halakha is this. Because of the takana, they ruled differently. And okay, this is almost like an intro to what's going to come in the 4th chapter and the 5th chapter, which is a list of all sorts of takanot, some related to get and some totally off the topic of get, all sorts of takanot that were instituted. And oftentimes we're going to have a problem, which is the takana to be more strict? Is the takana to be more lenient? What's the reason for the takana? According to who is the takana instituted? Was it Rabbi Meir? Was it Rabbi Elazar? We're going to have a whole discussion here trying to figure this out. And it's a good example of a Mishnah that doesn't spell everything out, and the rabbis are left with trying to figure out, put the pieces together, and because of that, we end up with many different opinions about it. So that's our intro, but let's start reading. Hakotev tofsei Gittin. If somebody writes the forms without the important parts in them, with the leaving blanks, so you have to leave blank the name of each of the people and the date. Okay, that stuff has to be left blank on a get. Shtare malve, if it's a promissory note you're writing, you have to leave the lender, the borrower's name blank, you have to leave how much money blank, and you have to leave the date blank. This sounds pretty obvious, right? When it comes to a sale, you have to leave the name of the buyer, the name of the seller, the name of how much money the sale was for, the location of the field, and the date. Mipnei hatakana. Sounds like all this is because of takana. Okay, what takana we don't really know yet. Okay, for what takana is this? Let's leave it open right now. Rabbi Yehuda posel b'kulan. Rabbi Yehuda, option number 2, says none of these are good. You can't write. Sounds like you can't write tofsei Gittin or milvet or sale. Any of these things can't be written. Okay? You can't keep form letters around. Form things as a sofer. Rabbi Elazar machshir b'kulan chutz migittin nashim. Rabbi Elazar has this unique opinion where he says yes by all other shtarot, but not by get. Why not by get? Shenema v'katav la lishma, because it says it has to be written. Right, this matches Rabbi Elazar perfectly. Has to be written lishma. Therefore, well, I should say somewhat perfectly. Therefore, even the tofes can't be written. Other shtarot, though, there is no such thing as lishma. So what's the big deal? You can write, and now the question is unclear from what he says here, but can you write everything, even names of people? Can a sofer, let's say a sofer's got a lot of free time, they don't have work, so what do? Just in case times get busy, they write all sorts of shtarot. There were a lot of names that were reused. They write basic names. Yosef lent Yaakov money, and even an amount of money. And then when someone comes, they go through their, they leave it alphabetized. They go through, they pull out a star, and voila, Some people say maybe they're just talking about the tofes. Okay, there's a debate about this between Rashi and Tosfot and others. I don't want to get in too much detail of that. I want to keep the more zoom out position. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Comes Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. You might remember him. Shmuel's been telling us the last few. Okay, I'll just review for a quick minute, and the Gemara is going to get to this as well. If you remember, we started with the Mishnah on Daf Kaf Aleph Amud Bet. Ein kotvim b'mechubar lakarka. You can't write when it's attached to the ground. Katvu b'mechubar talshu v'chatmu v'natnu lakasher. But if you did and you take it off and you sign it, it's good. And we had a whole debate. Does this mean, Rabbi Meir, that as long as you sign it, lishma, it's fine, even though you shouldn't really, right? We're going to be gozer, don't write the Torah, maybe you'll sign it. Or is this Rabbi Elazar who says, what it really means is don't write even the tofes, but if you wrote the tofes, then it's as long as you wrote the Torah, it's fine. Okay, and that was one way to read the Mishnah, and one of the people who explained the Mishnah as Rabbi Elazar was Shmuel. Then came the next Mishnah, even katan. And then there Shmuel also said, it's Rabbi Elazar, because why? How could a katan write a get? Because, right, even though the writing of the get is important, what did we say? Right, there's a gadol omed al gabav, we suggested, right? And then we had, one second. Right, there, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, as long as you left over the makom haTorah, right? That it's not good if the katan writes the get, they can write a get, but they have to leave the Torah. Okay? So that was the second Mishnah that Shmuel said is like Rabbi Elazar. And now we have this Mishnah, which is like, we're going to see in a second that he says, this is Rabbi Elazar. And then we're going to have to figure out, why did he have to say in all three cases, this Mishnah is Rabbi Elazar, this Mishnah is Rabbi Elazar, right? Obviously, the Mishnayot, wouldn't you just view them as one continuum? And if that's Rabbi Elazar, this is also probably Rabbi Elazar. Couldn't you have just figured that out? So that's going to be the next section. But right now, we're going to go into Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel without more introductions. Number one, he says, the main part of the get, besides the names of the people and the date, is also saying you are now permitted to every person. That's a key part of the get. So comes Yehuda in the name of Shmuel and says, if you write, right now the Tanakama who says you can write tofsei Gittin and leave the name of the man and the name of the woman, you also, he adds, by the way, you have to leave this line out, harayat mutar l'chol adam. And when you fill in the names of the people, you write harayat mutar l'chol adam. And this whole thing is Rabbi Elazar, This Mishnah, this unattributed opinion, we can already see a problem. What's the problem? Well, then you're saying tanakama is Rabbi Elazar. Then you have Rabbi Yehuda's position. And at the end of the Mishnah, you have Rabbi Elazar's opinion who disagrees with tanakama. How can Rabbi Elazar disagree with himself? We're going to deal with that later. But right now, he's telling us the tanakama is Rabbi Elazar, and you really need ktiva lishma. Okay, and that's why you have to leave open the main parts. Soon we'll get to them. What's the takana exactly? And really, just like we saw Rabbi Elazar said, you can't write the tofes when it's attached to the ground because you might come to write the Torah. Shouldn't he also forbid writing a tofes of a get ever? Right? Because the tofes isn't written lishma, maybe you'll accidentally fill in details of a man and a woman's name without it being with the intent of this particular person. But that's going to be why there's a takana. Okay, so let's hold off right now. Right now, we're just saying tanakama is Rabbi Elazar. And now we're going to go to the tzricha. Why did Shmuel need to tell us both in the Mishnah in Kaf Aleph and in the Mishnah in Kaf Bet and in the Mishnah here that it's all Rabbi Elazar? Couldn't you just have learned one from the other? Once he says that's Rabbi Elazar, you assume it's all continuing. So he's going to explain why each successive Mishnah, you might not have necessarily assumed it was the same. If you had the first one with the one about being attached to the ground, you would have said, that you could say is Rabbi Elazar, dekatane ein kotvin, because it starts off with, you can't write on something attached to the ground. That doesn't sound like Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir doesn't care at all about the writing. Vikatane ktavo, and then it says, right, it says, don't write, and then it said, if you did write, right, and then basically we'd have to say, right, that's Rabbi Elazar, meaning you shouldn't write the tofes because you might come to write the Torah, and then, okay, and that was how he explained it, even though the simple reading really is Rabbi Meir. But aval seifa the katani she'en kiyum aget ela b'chotamav ema Rabbi Meir he's amarei dechatim akarte. But there's a definite more reason to think that the Mishnah about the cheresh shoteh and katan is really Rabbi Meir, because at the end of that Mishnah it says the woman can write her own get because the key part of the get is the signatures. Right? Remember, we had to explain that according to Rabbi Elazar and say, if you say it's Rabbi Elazar, you have to say, well, Rashi said anyway, that signatures, usually the witnesses who signed also were the Eidei Masira, and had to somehow explain that according to Rabbi Elazar. Certainly the simple reading is. So even if you read the first Mishnah where the focus was on the writing and you said that's Rabbi Elazar, but when you get to the next Mishnah where it seems to say the purpose of the witnesses is, the importance of the witnesses is just that they sign it, it really seems to be Rabbi Meir. So he needed to tell us even that is Rabbi Elazar. And then, Yashmina Bahi, if you would have said just there, right, those two Mishnayot, you still wouldn't have known this Mishnah. Why? Here, there's a lot more reason to think this is not Rabbi Elazar, as I already explained, which is Abalha Emami Desefer Rabbi Elazar Have, Reshalav Rabbi Elazar. Here, you really would have thought this is Rabbi Elazar because Rabbi Elazar appears by name as the third opinion, which means that the unattributed opinion, the tanakama, the first opinion, who doesn't have a name, is likely not Rabbi Elazar, because the Mishnah sets up that there's three different people with three different opinions. If Rabbi Elazar is number 3, he can't also be number 1. And yet, Shmuel still says it's Rabbi Elazar. And that's why Shmuel needed to tell us on each Mishnah, this is Rabbi Elazar's opinion, because each successive Mishnah, you wouldn't have necessarily thought it was Rabbi Elazar. Now we're going to explain mipnei takana, and you're going to see several different explanations of what the takana is, and even within saying this is the reason for the takana, you still could get different interpretations. So we'll see that right now. My takana, what is the takana? First opinion we're going to have is Rabbi Yonatan, who goes like Shmuel, thinking that the Mishnah is Rabbi Elazar, and is the first opinion. Remember, only the first opinion mentions takana. So right now we're just dealing with the takana that appeared in the Tanakh. We're going to get to how Shmuel resolves the contradiction, okay? That's going to come soon. We're not going to get there yet. I see we still have this question. How could Rabbi Elazar also be number 1 and also be number 3? We'll get there right after we turn to Amud Bet. Mipnei takana. So my takana, what takana is there? So again, let's just go through. Tanakama says, you write tofsei Gittin, but just leave open the main parts. By get, by loans, by sales, all these things. And then it says, because of the takana. So what's the takana? Well, Rabbi Yonatan says, mipnei takanat sofer. Well, otherwise, sofer, we're going to have a very hard time being a sofer if you don't let them write these forms in advance. And again, like we just said, like Shmuel said, it goes like Rabbi Elazar. Ubedinhu, and really the law should have been, and this is why you need a takana. The law should have been, the letter of the law says, afilu tofes nami lo lichtov. You shouldn't even write the form because the whole thing should really be written lishma, even though maybe you don't really need the tofes to be written lishma. But if you write that, just like ein kutvim mechubar lakarka meant, don't write the tofes when it's attached, in case you might end up including the blanks, filling in the blanks when it's still attached to the ground. Same thing here. Don't write forms because you might end up filling in names and details which are going to disqualify your get then because your get won't be written lishma. However, mishum takanat sofrim shaul rabbanan, came the rabbis and they said, look, the sofrim's life is going to be too complicated. Again, there's lots of time where they have nobody asking them for things and they have no work to do. And then all of a sudden, everyone's going to come and need a get and need a this and need a that, and they're going to have no time to write all these things. They're going to lose business because they can't do it all. So, of course, it makes their lives much easier to have forms, and therefore we're going to allow this for people's livelihood, basically. So now they say, now let's go along with this and try to understand the different opinions in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda posel b'kulan. So Rabbi Yehuda has the opposite approach, and he says no takana, no way, no how. Not only by get, but all shtarot also. Why is that? There's no issue of lishma in other documents. So why? Number one, why can't you write the tofes? Gazal tofes atu tov. Rabbi Yehuda says, look, if we allow people to write these forms, they might accidentally fill in names as well. And we don't want that to happen because that will really disqualify the get. Now, it's only a problem for get. Well, gazal shtarot atu gittin. In order that people don't make the mistake about a get. If you're a sofer and you fill in names, you're right, Yosef lent money to Yaakov, and Yosef sold a house to Yaakov, and you have all these things around, you might accidentally write Yosef divorced Miriam and have that topus around, and Yosef and Miriam show up, and pulls out a get, and great, voila. Okay, so therefore, normally we don't do this. We don't do a gzeira on a gzeira, right? The gzeira is don't write a tofes because maybe you write a toreth, and then don't write it in other shtarot because maybe you'll do it in get. That's really like a double gzeira. We don't usually do that, which is why Rabbi Elazar comes into scribes. Rabbi Elazar machshir. Now we're up to opinion number 3, even though opinion number 1 was also Rabbi Elazar, hold off. But the Rabbi Elazar at the end of the Mishnah says, Rabbi Elazar machshir b'kulan chutz migitei nashim. Why? Well, let's take half of Rabbi Yehuda and not the whole of Rabbi Yehuda. What does he say? Tofes atu toref gazal. We did forbid the tofes because maybe you'll write the toref. So no writing tfasim, but only by get, because by get you need lishma. But shtarot atu gitin lo gazal. But we don't have a gzeira on a gzeira. Once you have one gzeira, there's no reason to make 2 gzeirot. So we don't say shar shtarot are a problem, only get. And as the Mishnah had said, shenemar v'katav la lishma. Now they're going to have a little bit of a problem with that because what's katav la lishma? Not talking about the tofes. Right? The Mishnah sounds like it's saying in gitin we say tofes because maybe you'll write the toreth. Because it says bekatav la lishma, it sounds like it's a Torah law, even though he just said it's a gzeira. So the Gemara is going to say, how does it say shenemar bekatav la? Ki ktiv la a Torah hu diktiv. It's not talking about the tofes. The pasuk in the Torah is talking about the Torah, meaning the tofes shouldn't be a problem. So why are you forbidding the tofes because of the pasuk? So they say no. Ela ema mishum shenemar. They add one word on account of that. It says bekatav la lishma, which is about the Torah. Therefore, we make the gzeira on the tofes. Again, this means, right, according to Torah law, the significant parts have to be written in with the intent of that man and that woman, etc. But and that's because it says la lishma, right? It says we write it for her, and the way they darshan la is lishma. It has to be in her name, which also means in his name and all that. But because it's a derive halakha that the Torah has to be written, they also said the tofes has to be written. But this is only by get and not by other documents. So far, we've understood the Mishnah in the following way. Let's just review before we move on and start understanding it differently. Option number 1, right? Opinion number 1, really you shouldn't write the tofes because you might come to write the Torah. Not in get, not in shar shtarot. But we permitted this in all areas, also get, also shtar, also right, any kind of other document. We permitted it because of the takana of the sofrim. So the sofrim have jobs and they make money, and we don't make their lives too difficult. We allow them, right, when they have free time, they can write these forms. Rabbi Yehuda said, no way, no how, no form ever, not for anything, because don't write the tofes, maybe you'll write the toref without right beforehand, and not shar shtarot because of get. Came Rabbi Elazar and said, no. Tofas atu Torah, we're going to worry about. No writing tfasim for get, but only in get where lishma is an issue. In other shtarot where lishma is not an issue, it's not a problem. Okay, so forms, no problem, you can write. Okay, there's actually a debate about whether he thinks not only forms you can write, but maybe even you could fill in names. The debate about how to understand his opinion. Okay, now, shenema, vikatavla. So I'm sorry, now moving to Amud Bet. Now we get to the question that we were struggling with, which is kasha de Rabbi Elazar de Rabbi Elazar. But still, according to this explanation, again, we started with Shmuel, that the first opinion is Rabbi Elazar. We explained the takana, according to Rabbi Yonatan, who goes with that approach, that it's Rabbi Elazar. And that the issue is, you really shouldn't write the tofes, because you might end up writing the Torah for Kilo Lishma, but we allow it because the Sofrim need to have jobs. So how do we explain that in the first part of the Mishnah, Rabbi Elazar appears as saying, you can write the tofes, everything, even in a get. And in the second part of the Mishnah, the last line of the Mishnah, Rabbi Elazar appears and says, by get, you can't. So, trey tanai v'aliba de Rabbi Elazar. The simple answer is, there's a Tannaitic debate about whether Rabbi Elazar forego this issue of writing tfasim for gets and allowed it because of the sofrim, or did he only allow it in other documents and not in get? Okay, that's a debate about what Rabbi Elazar actually held. So here we have a Tannaitic debate, which happens often, about what Rabbi Elazar actually held. Okay, that's according, again, it's a Tannaitic debate if, according to the Amoraim, it's the way the Amoraim read the sugya, it's the way Shmuel reads the sugya, and the way Rabbi Yonatan reads the sugya. We're going to see that some people think that it's Rabbi Meir. Okay, right now we're on the approach that it's Rabbi Elazar. It makes sense, by the way, in light of the other Mishnayot, that some people said they're Rabbi Elazar, some people said they're Rabbi Meir, and it would make sense they disagree about this one as well. It's kind of like, are the general Mishnayot that have unattributed opinions in our Masechet, are they Rabbi Meir, are they Rabbi Elazar? Now, if you remember, Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir, and usually the Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. But for whatever reason in Gittin, and you'll see why, because in the end, we hold like Rabbi Elazar when it comes to get, that Edim Masira Karte. So because of that, there seems to be this push that even though normally an unattributed opinion we assume is Rabbi Meir, in our Mishnah, right, again, an unattributed opinion doesn't necessarily mean tanna, which is our Mishnah, but the two other Mishnayot that we were discussing were just Mishnayot that came with no argument whatsoever, and usually it's attributed to Rabbi Meir. But as we saw, all of these are machlokot, who says them. Second opinion about what this takana is, and again, as we said, and who it goes according to. Rabbi Shabtai, Amar Chizkia, Rabbi Shabtai says in the name of Chizkia, Mishum Ktata. We're worried about a fight ensuing between the couple. What are we talking about here? Rabbi Meir, and here he comes and he understands the Mishnah totally different. He says, number one, the Mishnah is according to Rabbi Meir. According to Rabbi Meir, you don't really need Ktiva Lishma at all. All you need is it to be signed for the man and the woman. Ubedinhu, and therefore, according to Rabbi Meir, really by law, afilu Torah nami lichtav. You can even forget about the form. Not only can you write the form, you can even write the details of a man and a woman and have shtarot ready to go if you want it. Bezimnim, what's the problem? Now here, instead of the takana allowing something, which is what we just saw, right? According to Rabbi Elazar, it allowed us to do something we really shouldn't be doing, which is writing these forms, but we're going to be lenient. This is the opposite. This is going to forbid it. Rabbi Meir, by the letter of the law, you can totally write a tofes. You can even write a Torah. You can write the whole thing, have it ready, pull it out, and give it to this guy to divorce his wife. But what's the problem, according to this first opinion of Chizkia, according to Rabbi Meir? Zimnin Deshan, this is a very interesting one, right? This is how they get creative when they try to figure out, because if you're pushed to say it's Rabbi Meir, it really doesn't make sense. So, Zimnin Deshan Elal Sofel de Kakati. Let's say you live next door to the sofer, or you happen to be walking by his storefront, and you hear him writing. And some people, when they write, they talk out loud, and he's writing it, and he's saying, oh, blah, 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 you know, so-and-so is divorcing so-and-so, and the woman walks by, and she hears her name, and she hears her husband's name, and she thinks, oh my goodness, Savrat iu ka'amarle. She thinks that her husband told the sofer to write a get for her, and he didn't tell her. And she gets horrified and gets really angry at her husband. She goes home, and this huge fight ensues between them. And they have this huge fight. And to avoid those kind of fights, we do not allow Gittin to be written in the name of some person for some person when there's really no such thing going on, of no divorce in sight. Okay, that's an interesting one. Rav Chisda Amar Avimi Mishum takana agunot. Classic, we're going to have this a lot. Takana agunot. And we started our Masechah with it. We're always worried about agunot. Now, what do we mean by agunot normally? Aguna is what we generally call an aguna, and we're going to see it's not always this. But an aguna is someone, like an ogen is an anchor. It's someone who's basically chained into marriage, right? We always call it chained into marriage. She's stuck. She's in marriage. She can't get out. Now, we're going to have two interpretations. There's another example where Avimi was quoted by Rav Chisda as saying it's because of takana agunot, but nobody knew what he meant by that and what the concern for agunot is, and whether it's Rabbi Elazar or whether it's Rabbi Meir. So we're actually going to explain it in two totally different ways. So the first is, Amr la Rabbi Meir. Some people say it's according to Rabbi Meir, but Amr la Rabbi Elazar. Some people say it's Rabbi Elazar. Again, if you take Rabbi Elazar, it means that we're going to permit something in the takana, because the law is no, the takana is yes. According to Rabbi Meir, the law is yes, so the takana is going to be no. So now we have to explain. Amr la Rabbi Meir. Damal ede chatima karte. So again, if you're going to say it according to Rabbi Meir, so you're going to say Eidei Chatima is the main thing. Ubedinhu dafilu Torah pnami lichtov. And really, you could have even written the name of him and her, and none of that isn't right. Could have been written, all of that could have been written earlier. V'zimnin dahave ktata b'hadan. Now we're back to the ktata, but it's a little bit different this time. It could be there's a man who gets into a fight with his wife. A husband and wife get into a big fight. Be'rata halan, he gets really angry at her. V'zarik le'nia le'u ma'agin u'motivla. And he goes to the sofer. They skip that part, but it's obvious. They go to the sofer. The sofer's already got it written. So he quickly says, oh, great, give me the get. He takes it and then he throws it at her. And with that, now here comes the tricky part. Again, umotibla. He makes her an aguna, right? He puts her in the situation of being an aguna. Now, that's not an aguna according to what we say. She's divorced. So some people explain that what this means is he throws it to her. She's divorced. And that's another explanation of aguna. Aguna could be a woman who gets a divorce, I would say it like this, for no real reason, right? I mean, a reason they were in a fight. But basically, what does it mean to be an aguna? In this case, it's more like he leaves her stranded. Because women who got divorced in those days were really pretty stranded. They were left on the street, right? Maybe their fathers, they could go back to their father's house, but maybe not. And, they kind of had to fend for themselves. So aguna here doesn't mean aguna the way we usually think of an aguna who's not getting a divorce. She'll get a divorce, but he shouldn't really have divorced her because he was just angry. And basically, right, this is where nowadays, you try to do shalom bayit, you go to therapy, you try things before you quickly just get divorced. So this is to prevent quick divorces. Okay. It's a bit of a strange use of aguna. Some people actually explain, because it's not the use of aguna, and they want it to be the regular use of aguna, and then they also say, why does it have to be a case? Why does it have to say that he threw it to her? So now this is where you have textual, being careful of noticing words in text. They say what he did is he threw it, and now we're going to get to a whole chapter on or it starts out anyway, hazorei get, about someone who throws a get to his wife. Now remember, it has to be in her domain. Now we have a case where it might have fallen, and we're not sure if it was closer to him or closer to her, and whether it left his domain and went into her domain or didn't. Like it's within 4 cubits of her, but it's not clear whether it was closer to him or closer to her. And therefore, we're worried that maybe she's like in this suffix divorce, suffix not. He maybe left the scene. We have no idea now, and he's not giving her another divorce, and now she's stuck because she's not fully divorced. And that's a way to actually make this a real aguna situation, but it definitely doesn't seem to be the simple reading here. So that's one thing, right? It doesn't relate. I see you're asking about the date. It doesn't relate to the date issue. But maybe the date they put in that day, or the date also is rabbinic. So if you don't actually have the date, it's still a get. So that also could be why. Whereas if you don't have the name of the man, the name of the woman, it's disqualified on a Torah level. Okay, so that's one way of understanding agunot. And that was all according to Rabbi Meir. That again, the takana is this doesn't work. Okay. Now the second option is to say Amr la Rabbi Elazar. Really, you shouldn't even write forms, but we allow you to write forms. Now here we're going to use the real definition of an aguna, so we don't end up with a situation where we have agunas. Why would you end up with an aguna situation if you don't allow the sofrim to have forms around? Well, sometimes the husband wants to go abroad, wants to give his wife a get before he leaves. Below Eshkach Safra, and he can't find the sofer who has the time, his train is about to leave. Okay, fine. In those days, they didn't exactly have trains on time, but for whatever reason, he was in a rush. And he didn't find a sofer who had the time to start from scratch and write the get from the beginning. Vishavikla, so he'll just leave her, and then he leaves her just sitting there being an aguna. So that would be another possible explanation of what takana agunot are, where we want to have the sofrim have these forms available to make it easier for the men to divorce the wives, right? It's the opposite, obviously. In the other, we had to say we don't want to make it too easy. On the other hand, we have to make it easy. According to this interpretation, we're focusing on, we don't want a man to say this is too complicated, it's going to take too long, I'm just not going to bother, and just leave the wife, because he can go marry another woman if he wants, and she's stuck. So again, it's trying to figure out the situation of the woman, right? I was wondering right now when I was teaching it, and I see Gittin, you're writing, which is, were they writing this because they're worried they might not ever return? In other words, they're going abroad. It's not just that they're going abroad and plan to divorce her and just won't get around to it before they leave, but maybe also they're going abroad and they want to divorce their wives so that if something happens to them, they won't be stuck in a marriage. Okay, so now let's just review what we did until now. We won't review at the end of that, we'll review it now. It's just helpful to get this in place. So the first thing we did was deal with this Reira issue and basically say, don't worry about these contradictions between Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, they're not really contradictions, because really in the wine case, they hold there is Breira, it's a totally different reason, right? The warrior reason, what if it breaks? Then, and the best proof for that was it actually says it in the source, that's what they said to Rabbi Meir, so that must be the reason for their opinion. And then we've had this Mishnah with 3 different opinions. The first one had no name, and that's what caused all the confusion. And the first one had this takana, and we're not sure, is the takana to basically allow writing the tofes, or is the takana to say we can't write it? Okay, and then the question is, right, is it mikaradin, you can do this? And just, we had to say, oh no, you can't because of the takana, or is and that's Rabbi Meir, or is the mikaradin like Rabbi Elazar? It says you can't write it, and the takana is to allow it to be written. Okay, and that was what we saw. We actually then, according to, if we say it's all Rabbi Elazar, we explain then what the other 2 disagree about. And then we also had to figure out if it's Rabbi Elazar, how do we deal with the 2 Rabbi Elazars? And we basically say it's just different approaches to what Rabbi Elazar said. And if we review the takanot, either it's to make the sofrim slightly easier so that they have a livelihood, or it's to make sure the woman, I'm going to the end now because I'm going to stick with the 2 Rabbi Elazars first, it's to allow it to be written so that the husband doesn't get into a situation where it takes too long to write the get and he just doesn't bother. Or it's actually to forbid it, because if we allow, and really it's to forbid the Torah to be written, because if we allow him to put the name of his name and her name, she'll either hear that there's a thing going on, a cause strife between them, she'll think it's her get, and that her husband didn't tell her he was divorcing her when it really wasn't even true. And the other reason is because we don't want him to have it too easy for him to divorce her, and he'll just get angry and quickly pull out shtar from the, a get that's already from a sofer and give it to her. Now we're going to move on to a side issue, which is, it says in the Mishnah, Makom Asman, you have to leave the date. Now, if you remember, we had 2 reasons for the date. Why is the date in a get? Or on a Torah level, you don't really need a date. The reason is either Shema Yachpel Bat Achoto, maybe he'll protect his niece that he's married to, and he'll give her a get, and he'll claim it was before she actually slept with some other man while they were married. He'll claim the get was before and exonerate her. Then we had the second issue, which is payroll, which is her nichse malog, or used for property that she brings in that she inherited or got as gifts. She brings into the marriage. He has all rights to the produce until the get is either written, given, signed. We had all different opinions, but basically from around the time the get is written, the fruits go to her, and therefore we need the date to know when that is. Now the fruits go to him, the produce, only if they're actually married, not if they're betrothed. Now, let's just review laws of betrothal. Betrothal in the Torah, erusin, engagement, is not what we call engagement nowadays. It usually happened about a year before the wedding, and it was a formal act of betrothal. We do it under the chuppah, where at that moment she's forbidden to all other men, including even her husband. She only becomes permitted to him once they get married. But if she's with some other man in between, that's a problem, right? Like it's like she's an eshadish. She could get the death penalty because she's already designated to him to a certain extent, to the fact that she's now forbidden to all other men, which means you need a divorce from that. Let's say they decide not to go ahead with the marriage, they actually need a divorce. So now they're going to say the following. It just says that you need to leave blank the date, which they say means kapasik v'tani. They don't specify whether it was divorce from marriage or divorce from betrothal. So lo shtam in any soon, lo shtam in erusin. Since it didn't specify, it seems like you need a date, even if it's from a divorce from betrothal. So now we're going to have a problem because bishlam amina nisuin bein laman damar b'shum barachotu ika bein laman damar b'shum peri ika. Whether you say the reason is we're worried he's going to protect his niece, or we're worried about the produce, if it's from marriage, it makes perfect sense. But elamina erusin bishlam alaman damar b'shum barachotu ika. Well, if you're worried about that she was with some other man and he's going to claim, right, we don't have a date on the get, so he'll just claim the divorce was earlier to protect her from the death penalty. Well, that would be true also for betrothal. But here comes the question. There is no such thing as produce when they're betrothed. All her nifsei malog only becomes, he only has rights to it once they're married. So if you do a divorce from betrothal, and you hold that the whole reason for the date is because of the payrote, it's an irrelevant factor for a divorce from betrothal. So why did it seem to say the date is important to leave blank and fill in specifically? This doesn't really seem like the issue of lishma. This seems more the issue of why is there even importance for a date in a get for betrothal if you hold payrote. So Rav Amram, this is really a big day of people saying things or reading or understanding things and not knowing why. Okay, like the Mishna, nobody really knew why. What's the takana? Here, he heard Ula say the reason is because of takana vlad, because of a child that might be born. But I didn't understand what he was talking about. But then all of a sudden I heard this other source, and then I realized that the issue here is the issue he was talking about the date and the get for someone who's betrothed. So what's the braita? It's a different case, but it also has to do with betrothal, and from there we're going to learn Taurus. So it's a very strange case. Unlikely anyone would really do this, but again, theoretical cases. Write a get for my betrothed wife, the woman I'm betrothed to right now. So the get is to be given to her. Basically, it's like a get on condition. As soon as I bring her into the marriage, which means I have relations with her, I'm going to immediately divorce her. Ain't no get. This does not count as a get. What's the problem? Amar Ula, right? Thankfully, because that's a ridiculous kind of a get. Amar Ula Mata. And what's the reason? If they know the get was written earlier, what are they going to say? Well, he actually consummates the marriage first, and then the get kicks in. What if he gets her pregnant and she has a child? People are going to say, well, he betrothed her when they were betrothed. He divorced her when they were betrothed. So it seems like her get happened before she had the child. They're going to see when she got pregnant, when the baby's born, and then they're going to say, oh, this must be a child born out of wedlock. Now, you have to remember, this isn't a mamzer, but it will be a child that people will say not nice things about. They'll say, oh, this child was born out of wedlock. So that's why we don't allow that kind of a get. So now, once I understood there was this takana vlad. It's something theoretically that might technically work because it is a condition that theoretically could work. The rabbis forbade because it'll say, people will say things about the offspring. Same thing here. You have to make sure to put the get from erusin, because if they don't put it right, again, the date is important, and the date has to be really the date of the divorce. Because if it's the date when, let's say, they start writing the get or something and she's betrothed, and then what if, we don't know, but maybe in the end they did get married, and then she has a child, and then we see they're not married anymore, that the divorce happened, he gave her the divorce document at some point. We don't have a date for when the divorce document was given. It's going to create this kind of problem of people will say, maybe her get was given before she had the child. Okay, so that must be the reason of takana vlad, why you need the date in a get, even if payrote is not the issue. Okay, even if normally payrote is the issue, you still would need it from erusin because of this possibility that maybe you'll have this get from erusin, which doesn't even give her till later, which makes it seem, by the way, that it can't be the date the get was written. It has to be really the date the get was given, which goes a little against what we were talking about earlier, that really they write the date was written. It's a little confusing, this sugya, how this works with that. Okay, Amar Rabbi Zeira, Amar Abba Bar Shila, Amar Rav Amnuna Saba, Amar Rav Adabar Abba, Amar Rav. Okay, a long tradition. Rabbi Zeira quoting this one, to quote that one, to quote that one, eventually getting back to Rav. And now we have the psak halakha ki Rabbi Elazar. We pass him like Rabbi Elazar, who said, the Rabbi Elazar who appears in name at the end of our Mishnah, that machshir bekulam chutz migitei nashim, which means, yet you cannot write even the tofets. Okay, you can't write the form. So now, Kare Rav Ale, Rav said about related to Rabbi Elazar, to Vani de Chakime. He's the happiest of the Chachamim because they pass him like him. So it's, when you pass him like him, right? It's very nice. Afilu b'shar shtarot nami. So now the Gemara says, do we pass like him across the board that tofes can be, right? What did he say? Tfasim can't be written for get, but they can be written for shar shtarot. And it seems like even the Torah can be written b'shar shtarot, right? You don't have to worry even about writing. You could write names of people they took a loan and then just have them ready to give out. Do we really hold that way? Which sounds like Rabbi Elazar is saying. Bahama Rav Papi, and they're going to question this. Mishmei derava. Hi ashrata dedaine. Demikatva mekami delusad usad achtimat yadayu psula. Alma mechseker shikra, and therefore akanami mechseker shikra. So how can we possibly say this? Because someone else paskins in the name of Rabbah that what? Rav Papi. He says there were documents that the Dayanim would write. A document would come to court and they verify the signatures. Now, when they verify the signatures, what happens? Two witnesses come and say, we verify these signatures. The Dayanim write what's called an ashrata dedaina. They write a document that says, we, the three judges, so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, sat here and saw two witnesses come forward and say, we verified the signatures of this document, and it's good. If they wrote out the text before the witnesses testified, let's say they know those witnesses are coming, so they prepare the document ready to go. Right? This is what we would do nowadays. We'd have it all ready to go, and they would just come forward, testify, and we'd sign it. If you write it before, he says it's no good because it looks like a lie, because they wrote words that weren't true. They wrote, we, the Dayanim, saw, right, listened to these judges, these witnesses, and it wasn't true. They didn't. They hadn't yet. So it sounds like writing so-and-so lent money to so-and-so would also look like a lie if you wrote it before it actually happened. How could you say the Sharshta wrote it works? To which he answers, Veleta. It's not true. What's not true? Either it's not true, we don't hold like what Rav Papi said in the name of Rabbah, or we hold that way, but that case is different. There's a debate about this. But in any case, let's read. Either which way you read it, they're basically saying, yes, we do hold you could do it with other shtarot. How do we know this? Rav Nachman, Omer Haya Rabbi Meir, or Rabbi Meir used to say, right? Even if you find it in the garbage, you could pick up a get and give it to the couple. And when the rabbis disagree with him, they only disagree about a get because of the be'ina k'tiva lishma. No, they don't think it's a problem with other shtarot. And here's your proof that it's really not a problem and that we're not worried about it. It looks like a lie. Because he said, let's say I lent you $100 and you gave me back the $100. And then I already wrote the shtar, right? And then you gave me the $100 back. And then you borrowed money the same day. Can I just give you the shtar back? And then, or whatever, can I keep that shtar that we had and use it on the second $100? And the answer is no. But we can't use it as a shtar. That milva will end up being a milva al peh, which is not connected to lien property. I can't collect it from lien property. Why? Because it was liened from when the time we wrote it the first time, but the lien basically is up as soon as you pay me the money back. We don't have a new lien. You have to write a new document to get a new lien on the property. And you didn't do that. Now notice what it says here. It doesn't say here we're worried it looks like a lie because I didn't really, right? We're reusing an old shtar. And it doesn't say it looks like a lie. It's some other reason. Because of that, we see Mechzi Kashikra is not an issue. We're not worried that it looks like a lie. So basically, in the end, they say, yes, we paskin like Rabbi Elazar across the board. Okay, so that's the conclusion they come to. And with this, we'll end today's daf. We already kind of did a summary of most of the daf, so we're going to leave it here and finish for today. Have a great week, everybody.